Hey folks, welcome back to the New Player Play-Along Guide. We are in the classical era now as the Achaemenid Persians. This era, we're going to be talking about how to really set yourself up for the rest of the game. Most of the time when you're playing Humankind, you really make or break in the ancient and classical era. Medieval, maybe every once in a while, and then by the early modern, typically the game is pretty set. There are a couple exceptions, of course, like there is with every rule, but really performing well in the ancient and classical era is where you're going to set yourself up for success for the rest of the game. So we are playing as the Achaemenids, who are expansionists, and I find the classical era to be a good point at which to kind of reevaluate what all your cities are doing, your strategy going forward in the game. And typically at the start of every era, I am going to take a peek at all my cities anyway, and part of the reason for that is you get access to your emblematic quarter, right? Every time you take a new culture. So you're going to be wanting to build that. But you're also going to have some new priorities, right? So for instance, I've unlocked a whole bunch of new technologies in the classical era that I'm going to want to research. And I might want to do that quickly. I might want to accumulate a bunch of gold for, whatever reason. I might have to build a whole bunch of military. So this is a good point in the game to think about what your strategy is for each of your cities. And right now, I would really like to get the Satrap's Palace, which is our emblematic quarter for the era. I also need to get an embassy. So the embassy is unique to the Together We Rule expansion pack, and this is what enables a whole bunch of diplomacy options. So I'll just go right here. You see here there's this embassy tab, and that allows you to spend leverage, which is a sort of diplomatic resource that you can collect, and you can't actually spend it until you've built an embassy. The embassy has some interesting effects, so it gets stability per era, as well as extra influence per era per adjacent district. So you really want it in an area where it has a lot of adjacency. And I was kind of thinking about where I want to put the embassy before, as well as thinking about where I want to put the Satrap's Palace. And I noticed that there might be a pretty decent option right here. You can see here I actually have a three-way connection on my territories. In theory, I could put one of these Satrap's Palace here, here, and here, but that would kind of cut out the embassy a little bit. So I'm actually thinking I can maybe put the embassy right here, and then stack some of these quarters around the outside of it, right? So one here, and then the last one could go right up there. And that way the embassy will get a lot of influence, which is nice, because influence is pretty hard to come by. But also the Satrap's Palace benefits from adjacent quarters as well. You get extra adjacency on your influence per adjacent district on the Satrap's Palace. So that's a really nice kind of way to combine that. So the embassy, because it's a shared project, when you put it down, you're committing to it. It doesn't have to be connected to a city center, this one. I am just going to place it right there. And I'm also going to queue up a couple of these Satrap's Palace so that they're kind of surrounding it. I could maybe delay this one and put it right here instead, and that way it'll be adjacent to another Satrap's Palace. So the benefit of that is twofold. First, it's an extra district adjacency, right? So they will both mutually benefit from the increased influence per adjacent district. But also because they're both market quarters, once I actually get the food market here, as well as some later infrastructure, this provides extra adjacency on market quarters per adjacent market quarter. So kind of two options there. I could build it there just to make it easier, but I might hold on to it and put it there just to save myself a bit of time. Or to save myself a bit of headache, I guess. So I could go here if I value the the influence adjacency a little bit more, right? So this has more open slots around it that can be filled in, whereas right here I'm actually blocked by a mountain tile, right? So the maximum sort of feasibility is not as good here. However, the other consideration is that there's a forest here, which is really good for industry that I might not want to lose, and that forest can get better later depending on the religious tenets that I take. So I'm actually going to commit to putting it right there. Even though it's not the most efficient right now, I think longer term that will be slightly more efficient. I'm also going to kind of look at my units that are in here, or not my units, my population. And I'm going to start moving a whole bunch of people onto science. I had put people on money because I wanted to get the era stars, but right now I'm interested in getting some techs. And in the classical era, there are a few high priority technologies that I'm going to rush for pretty much every single time. So one is standing army. The main reason for rushing standing army is access to many of the emblematic units, including the immortals for the Persians, as well as the swordsmen, which are basically the bread and butter of the classical era. You'll note there is no upgrade for any ranged units unless you have an emblematic unit that is ranged. So standing army is usually the go-to as far as military for the classical era. It swings the balance of military in favor of melee because swordsmen are quite a bit stronger than warriors and certainly stronger than archers. The other core techs include hydrology. So hydrology gives you another set of river upgrades. So the first is the artificial reservoirs, which gives you an extra 2 food on rivers, as well as the water mill, which gives you industry on rivers. So both of these are very powerful infrastructure to upgrade your city. And this is one of the core reasons that you really want to try to settle your cities on rivers as much as possible, is because of these infrastructure. Also gives you access to the aqueduct, which you typically won't need right away, but 20 extra stability is another 2 districts, or potentially more, depending on the strategy that you've pursued up to this point. Other core techs include philosophy. So philosophy unlocks the research quarter. It gives you 1 extra city cap and gives you the school. And then eventually rhetoric as well, where the library is really important, so the +1 science per population. And then finally, craftsmanship is also good. Slightly lower priority, I would say, overall, because it's going to take a while for your cities to scale up to the point where you get a ton of benefit from these. But the charcoal kiln and artisan's workshop both increase the industrial potential of your cities. There are a lot of techs that you're not going to make like a ton of use of this era. I frequently skip fortifications. This does upgrade your home guard, but unless you're like in immediate danger, this fortifications doesn't really do much for you. Conquest is basically a dead technology. Reduced attach outpost cost is fine. You also have this games, which is a project that your cities can do, but I wouldn't really recommend it. And then siege tactics is fine, like the extra unit slot in an army can be useful. The Commons Quarter unlocks with Imperial Power, but you're unlikely to need it right away. And then foreign outposts, this is pretty, I wouldn't say it's useless, but it's very niche, and you're not going to get a ton of value out of either of those. So it's a pretty front-loaded era. And I'm actually going to start with standing army, and the reason for that is I have this aggressive independent people that is starting to spawn here. And because we have people that I know have swordsmen right here, right? The independent people are also going to have access to swordsmen. So I need to be able to fight them off and deal with them. So I'm going to start with standing army. And actually, I'm going to queue into hydrology, and I can do that by shift-clicking. So that adds hydrology as my second research in the queue. And the reason I want hydrology is because I have a lot of river that is being exploited, right? So if you did not have a lot of river, you probably wouldn't go for hydrology first, but I have plenty of river, so that's why I'm choosing that right after I get access to standing army. Also on Thebes, I am going to relocate this person, actually, because that brings me down to 5 food, right? So having 1 guy here is having the amount of time it takes to grow, so I'm actually going to leave them on food. In Memphis, I have enough to buy out this Maker's Quarter, and I think I am going to do that. I have enough gold right now, and by buying out that Maker's Quarter, I increase my industrial capacity. And I'm thinking about maybe putting these guys on science just to get things a little bit faster. So you can see it has no material impact on how many turns it's going to take to get hydrology, right? So this was already 3 turns of research, but maybe if I move some people onto Mycenae, I can get that down to 2 turns. Okay, now we're at 2 turns. And Mycenae, because I can't build any districts here yet, I'm actually going to have Mycenae assist on building the embassy since it is a shared project. Remember, we just captured this last episode, and the stability is still recovering. So you want it to be at 35 before you can actually build any districts. So you're kind of limited to building infrastructure or helping on shared projects. Right now I'm going to help with the embassy so that Thebes can have that available, and then we can talk a little bit more about the diplomacy screen and some of the embassy actions. Memphis could also help with the embassy if I wanted it to. I'm going to take a look at some of the infrastructure in here really quickly. House of Scribes is something I will want eventually. However, I think I want to go for some of these, and this is going to be a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging placing some of these satraps' palaces, because I don't have like a clear sort of area in which they're all going to intersect. That also doesn't kind of interfere with my ability to get some Maker's Quarter adjacency, right? So remember, Maker's Quarters, just like all other quarters, benefit from adjacency to quarters of the same type. So to the extent possible, you want to keep your different types of quarters sort of specialized in distinct areas. So down here, we could potentially build this Satrap's Palace right here, and maybe fill this area out with market quarters. However, let's take a closer look at where the border is. You can kind of see this little dashed line, right? So that dashed line indicates the borders, and it's kind of hard to see, so you have to be paying pretty close attention. There is a triple intersection, but these are really good tiles for me, and I don't want to eat those up because I want to preserve those for Maker's Quarters to the extent possible. So these Satraps' Palaces are going to be a little bit more distributed than some of the other ones, which is totally fine. Thinking probably put that... This will be slightly lower influence, but I think I'll fill this out later, because I can get some maybe Farmer's Quarters and maybe some Maker's Quarters in there. Alternatively, maybe I accept losing a little bit of industry right here. And then I can get a Satrap's Palace like right here, because that'll extend my city center out to this tile. You can just barely see that outline there. And putting it... Oh, actually, that is in this territory here. Okay. See, this is why you have to pay close attention to the exact borders. So I'd actually have to put the Satrap's Palace right here. And then I could build one like right there. I don't know if that's worth it though, because of these coastal tiles, right? So I'd have to have harbors here, but I can only have one harbor in each territory unless I have a special harbor. So because this has adjacency, I want these as much inland as possible. So the other option, I mean, I could maybe try to get something in here. So maybe I actually grab like a farmer's quarter on this tile to build out to it. Then I could do a Satrap's Palace there and there, maybe. This is actually, now that I'm like looking really closely at this, it's a little challenging to decide where to put it. I think I'm just gonna not overthink it and not try to get too fancy with placement here, even though I've talked about it a lot. I'm just going to put it in kind of recommended locations. Right there, I think, well, I'll probably fill research quarters in there later, so we'll put it in that spot. And then the last one, we'll kind of build down towards the sage here, because that can get filled in with market quarters and get some adjacency for being by the sage. Also going to move the harbor down. It's kind of low priority for the time being. Okay. Next thing to think about is a little bit of diplomacy here, and I have two things in mind. First, I have almost no vision of the rest of the map outside of my own borders. What I want to do is try to find someone who will share maps with me. And I think I'm going to try the player that is the farthest away. So they're hesitant right now, but we'll see if they'll do this. So if you go, if you click on their thing up here, and then you go to treaties, you have all these different options. What I want is share maps. And if they accept, which they have, I will now be able to see all the stuff that they have explored. So I have vision of most of the continent at this point, and this gives me some really good information about what luxuries are where, kind of the setup of some of these different cities, that sort of thing. So really helpful to be able to have that. I also want to do a little bit of trade with this player here, because I do have a trade agreement with them, and I'm particularly interested in the salt. The salt gives you food on all cities, and extra food for each additional salt on all cities. So the way this works, right, is if you come into this menu and you hit trade, this 45 right here, that 45 is the base cost to acquire each unit of salt from that player. So you'll see when I bump this up, this on bottom increases by 45 for every access, right? However, the maintenance of the trade route does not change. The maintenance of the trade route is the same regardless of how many accesses that you want. So in general, it's just best to buy as many of the one resource that you want as possible. It's harder to maintain additional trade routes. I'm going to buy the salt just for demonstrative purposes. And then, if I go into the ambergris, right, you'll see that this also has its own maintenance cost. So it can get quite challenging to actually maintain a lot of these different trade routes over time. I could think about the silver. I actually don't have any research quarters yet, but I actually think the ambergris might be worth it because it's just flat science on all cities. So I'm going to buy that as well. And then you'll see the next resource access maintenance cost increases pretty dramatically. And it scales up over the course of the game. And how many resource accesses that you have. The other thing that I want to do is kind of make use of my expansionist ability. So what are they called? And let's see if I can find it. So this one right here, right? So every culture has an affinity, and the affinities all have kind of two distinct effects. So there's one that is a passive effect, and one that is an active effect that you have to choose to use. I didn't use the one from the previous era at all with the Egyptians. The active effect with builders basically lets you click a button, and it converts all money and science yields into industry. And the other effect as a builder is a stability effect. You kind of get temporary stability when you build buildings. It's kind of an odd one because your stability will collapse later in the game as you stop building those things and transition into a new culture. So it's a little bit tricky to manage. But regardless, we are expansionists right now. And expansionists have, again, two effects, right? The first is that expansionists can always trespass in enemy territory. So no longer do you need to have open borders with someone in order to move into their territory. So just like this, I'm going to walk in and start exploring some of the orange tiles here. The other effect with expansionists is this under one banner. So what I could do is move this, say, army onto this administrative center and activate this thing right here, right? So you can see I can target it. If they're not interrupted, then in 5 turns, I actually add this to my empire as an outpost. I can basically steal stuff from other players without going to war. The main problem is that it's really easy to interrupt, and it's often easier to just go to war with another player. So it doesn't end up being used very often, but we'll see if I can actually manage to make use of it in the near future. So let's end our turn. And Mycenae can finally start building districts. And we actually have a really nice tile there for a satrap's palace because it is surrounded by 2 of these luxury resources. So that's going to give it a really nice bonus. And then we'll also fill in that iron as well. Iron is a strategic that unlocks in the classical, provides access to certain emblematic units, as well as being important actually for some units later in the game. This is a decent location as well, just because it's adjacent to a luxury resource. And then over here, it's recommending one of these 2 tiles. I think we'll probably build it out to the right, just because this is completely open around it, so it has more potential adjacency. We have also unlocked a civic, and neither of these are going to be important. So what you can do with civics, right, you can just sit on these, and eventually, even if the effect doesn't have any major impact on you, you can kind of use them to move along the different axes here, right? So for instance, I have the collectivism versus individualism axis here, which gives extra industry or extra money, depending on which side you're on. So what I could do is conserve this, to move myself along an axis when I decide I want to do so. Sometimes things like events will move you on an axis in a direction that you don't want to go, or you want another civic that gives a certain impact, right? So say I wanted stability per researchers on say your outpost, but I want to also be on the progress side of this axis. I could save another one that has no material impact to move myself in that direction. So that's something you can think about while you're playing, right? Is how you actually manage to conserve your civics and implement them at the proper times. I'll try to find an example of that this episode if I manage to do that. So I have finished actually the technology that gives me access to this. Looks like it understated how much science I was getting, but I am going to use this opportunity to upgrade these warriors to swordsmen, because I actually have an independent people right here that is trying to pillage my luxury resource extractor. So we're going to need to have some more modern units in order to deal with them. The chariots can also be pretty dangerous, and we'll actually bring this unit over here as well that's been sitting in Thebes, just so we have another unit that can reinforce that battle once we initiate it. In the meantime, we can also move this unit down here, and I'll try to show off I'm going to upgrade these guys. I'll try to show off under one banner as well, but what you're more likely to see is just how easy it is to actually interrupt. So our embassy is almost complete, and also Mycenae can get another one of these. This is interesting. So let me call that back. I didn't realize I had 2 territories right here. Yeah, so I can give up a river tile for this. So river tiles I am usually hesitant to give up. I actually think that the adjacency here might be worth it. When you build the infrastructure that gives you yields on rivers, that actually applies regardless of what type of district is available on that tile. So I will lose the base yield of the river, but I will get any infrastructure increases still, even though the Satrap's Palace is a money thing. I'm like zooming in on it like it's there. It's right here in my queue. Okay. I could also consider pulling some people off research, I think. I would like to maintain 2 turns for that next tech. However, it is not strictly necessary. So I am going to start putting people on industry just so I'm producing these queues at a reasonable pace. Okay. I should also think about what my next target is. I think it's likely to be Babylon. And I don't believe I have any crises against them. No way to increase my war supports at the moment. Now, that you can just surprise war, and that's definitely manageable most of the time. Little more challenging to manage war support now with the new updates because enemies can refuse to surrender. But surprise wars are still perfectly viable. They actually want to trade luxuries with me. I'm going to refuse because I know I'm going to be fighting them. And you'll see that when I refuse that treaty, they get a grievance against me. They haven't asked for anything from it. They have 10 turns to decide. But we'll come back to that in just a moment when we have our own, and I can show you a little bit more about how that grievance system works. Okay. I've also received a proposal to trade everything, and you can have multiple statuses, right? So forbidden trade, trading luxuries, or trading everything. So trading everything enables the strategic resources to be traded as well. And what's interesting about the strategic resources, I mean, it gives you access to things you potentially don't have that you need in order to build units. But also, the strategic resources provide some additional value to certain infrastructure. So if I look at the infrastructure that I have, I can see the forge in Memphis, right? The forge gives you +1 industry per copper. So if I were to buy the copper from this guy here, right, which is here, I could get an additional +4 industry on all my cities in which I have that infrastructure. So it can be helpful to trade those resources when the option comes available, as long as you're not targeting that particular player in the near future. So we've also unlocked our tier 1 religious tenet. Let me deal with this battle first, actually, and then we'll talk about religion. This is a really bad position. I am probably just going to hide my unit down here. And then use these guys to come in and do some real damage. Okay. So I'm going to have this archer come behind this sword, so it kind of serves as a barrier to this chariot. I'm going to put this other archer up here, because this way they kind of have to attack uphill in order to get to him. So chariots are very dangerous units, so you do need to kind of respect their ability to attack you and to move around, especially to archers. They're quite dangerous. Probably not going to make that attack, because this guy could potentially have gotten rear attacked, and that would be a pretty bad situation to be in. Okay, so we can melee that chariot, and then we can... Not sure. This feels like it might be bugs. This guy is currently getting Zone of Controlled, I believe. Even though he shouldn't. I wonder if, like, the Axomite ability is getting applied here. Okay, well, we'll just not do anything fancy. Just take our shots. There's a downhill attack right here. You see that I just am conserving my health on this unit because he's taking quite a few hits. I see there's a fortified location here, which is preventing you from moving into it. You have to use all your movement to move into a fortified location. So no bug, just couldn't read what was causing me to not be able to move. But yeah, downhill attacks, shoot units. I see, because it spawned an independent people. We should talk about independent peoples. Actually, there's going to be a few things that we're going to cover on this turn. So first is Tier 1 religious tenets. So Tier 1 religious tenets, there's a huge variance in how good they are. There are a few core ones that you're probably going to default to. So the first is abstain from intoxicants, is probably the most overpowered. So +2 industry on forest and woodland is the main effect of this. So that means if I were to take that, all this forest, including like the ones where I've already built a Maker's Quarter on, like this one, are going to get +2 industry. It's an incredibly, like, ridiculously overpowered tenant compared to pretty much every other tenant at almost every tier. So this is a really good default one if you have a lot of forest or woodland, which should happen most of the time. The other one that is really good is Be Virtuous as Water. Extra stability on rivers is really, really strong, because your civilization should really be centered around rivers anyway. And especially as you get later into the classical era, and particularly the medieval era, managing your stability can be really challenging. It is a little bit easier once you get into the early modern and start getting things like manufactories, but this is a huge boon to you for the vast majority of the game. So these two are usually my go-tos. There are a couple others you can consider. So Respect the Sea's Bounties is one that you'll want if you have played the Phoenicians, or if you intend to adopt kind of a harbor-centric strategy. So usually pretty good on like higher continent count kind of maps. Or again, if you've pursued a coastal strategy, you can really stack up some really nice food bonuses on the water. Reject Luxury, which has been taken already, is okay. It's similar to Seek Wisdom, which we'll cover in a moment. So you get the 5 money on luxury resource deposits. So every deposit that you see here, right, including this sage, this silver, this dye, each of those would get +5 money. I would not get a ton of money from that. It's like an okay tenant, and one you can take if the good ones are mostly taken, but I wouldn't recommend it. Same kind of thing with Seek Wisdom, except it's science on strategic resource deposits. So this one is limited as well, right? And part of the problem with that one, I apologize, I'm running out of breath a little bit, so I think I need to slow down. But part of the problem with that one as well is that you can't actually extract a lot of the strategic resources at the start of the game. So it can be a little bit more challenging to make use of that, because a lot of them are going to be invisible for several eras. And by invisible, I really mean unknown, right? You won't discover them until later. Another option, Shelter the True Oracles. So extra influence on Mountain is actually not terrible, depending on the situation that you're in. right now, I don't have enough mountain to really justify it, but if you have adjacent districts, you can get influence from mountains. So, like, if I were this player, and this is a great example, actually, because they played the Zhou in the previous era. This player has a lot of mountains in this terrain, and influence in the early game is pretty good, and it's pretty hard to get the Aesthete era stars, especially as you get later into the game. So you can take Shelter the True Oracles. Say if you're in a situation like this, you could get a lot of influence from that, and eventually, get up to Babylon, where you could get a decent amount from some of the mountainous terrains in there. There are viable places for it, but it's not like a generally good tenant. It's one that's very situational, and still not as good as Be Virtuous as Water, or Abstain, or Respect the Sea's bounties at their kind of respective roles. Spite Unbelievers is okay. The extra experience on creating units, I believe this is enough experience to give your unit a veterancy level. So what that means, let me zoom in on one of my units here. So you can see these stars right here. These stars above the units go up to 3 stars. So for each of those stars that they have, they get +1 combat strength. You can see I have 28 combat strength compared to 27 right here. So they get experience as they kill units, and starting with 25 basically gives you an extra veterancy level right out of the gate. It's okay, but not particularly necessary. The reduced unit upkeep is also okay, but you should be making enough gold that this isn't that big of a deal. And then finally, Hunt the Infidels gives you the extra war support when winning a battle, and extra war support when an opponent retreats. I don't find war support to be particularly difficult to manage, especially now in the Achilles update. They have changed the way that Placate works, which is one of the diplomatic actions. So maintaining war support is quite a bit easier now even. So I wouldn't generally recommend this one either. It's okay if you struggle with war support, but as you learn to play the game, you're really not going to struggle with war support very frequently. So for this game, I am going to take Abstain from Intoxicants. It combines really nicely with the Egyptians that I played in the previous era, and I have a ton of forest and woodlands in my empire. So I'm just going to give you like a little preview of where I'm at with industry, right? So 219, 271, and 234. And then I'm going to adopt Abstain from Intoxicants. And you can see, right, 268. I'm going to be, like 325 in Memphis and 284. It's a very strong pennant that will propel you, towards the end of the game very nicely. And you'll see here now, right, 21 industry from a single maker's quarter if I chose to build it there. Also, I'm close to being able to claim a wonder, which I will probably do in a minute. I have also finished the embassy, right? I did that a little bit ago, but I just want to explain a little bit more about how that works. Let's go into our allies thing here. So orange, and I can go to embassy, and you can see I have several different options. So on the left side here, these are leverage actions. So you have placate, expel military forces, diplomatic ultimatum, expose undercover assets, and apply economic sanctions. So you can use leverage in order to do these different things. What is leverage? So leverage is a resource that you actually can generate in one of 2 ways. And I'm looking for something right now, and I don't see anything. So the first is picking a thing up on the map. It has a leverage icon. It looks like a pawn from chess, and you need a special unit in order to pick it up, which is called an envoy. So the envoys here, they unlock at wheel, and they can run around and pick up the leverage. If you're playing a diplomatic culture, if you have that expansion pack, the diplomatic culture passive allows you to pick up leverage with any unit, actually. So that can be helpful, so you don't have to build envoys. But it's pretty marginal. The other option for generating leverage is if you have any grievances, which I currently do not. Maybe I can get one. So you can actually get grievances if people reject your proposals. See if he'll share maps with me. He will not. So you'll see here, I have the treaty proposal refused, and I can demand that to start building war support, right? Or, I talked about that last episode, or I can renounce that particular grievance in order to get leverage. So I'm going to renounce because I'm not interested in fighting them right now. You'll see if I go in here and go to embassy, I now have 5 total leverage, like you can see in the upper left. Excuse me. Okay, pardon me for that. And then we have a few options here, right? So placate basically reduces the war supports of the other empire by 10. It's pretty cheap, and you can no longer do it in war, so you have to be at peace with the opposing player. You can expel military forces. So basically, when an enemy unit is trespassing in someone else's territory, they take some health damage. So if I do this, it basically suspends the effects of open borders for a turn. They'll take some damage. Useful at peace if you think someone's going to attack you. I haven't used it very much. Diplomatic Ultimatum. So Diplomatic Ultimatum is one of the more useful ones. So when you hit Diplomatic Ultimatum, if you have any demands that are active, it forces them to kind of make a decision on the demands, which is either to reject the demands or to acquiesce to them, right? If you have enough military forces and you're a lot stronger than they will often acquiesce to your demands. And these can be really powerful in situations where, say, you have like a lot of cultural control of your continent and you have demands related to the territories in which you have that control, and the AI can like give you things basically for free. You have expose undercover assets. Expose undercover assets basically shows the location of hidden units. So you'll get things like saboteurs later in the game that are invisible. This allows you to see them. And then the apply economic sanctions. I think this inhibits trade, but I actually have literally never used this impact or this effect. You can see that these different leverage actions unlock over the course of the game. So Placate is available from the very first era, and then each era unlocks a different leverage action, with the exception of the industrial, because economic sanctions only becomes available in contemporary. Then on the right here, we have agreements. So agreements requires both empires to have an embassy, and there's a few different things to consider. So agreements are, playing nice with people, of course. So you have scientific correspondence. So this can be really nice if you're playing a game where you are actually behind on technology and have a friendly empire that's ahead of you. So if you take scientific correspondence, you can get a science cost reduction on technologies that have been researched by the player you have that agreement with. So if the Carthaginians were, say, in the medieval era, I could sign scientific correspondence, and every tech they've already researched, I would get discounted. There's the arms deal. The arms deal is interesting because it gives you the ability to build the other player's emblematic unit. It also gives them the ability to build your emblematic unit. So there's a bit of a push and pull there, right? But maybe once in a while you can find a use for this, especially if you're playing a culture that doesn't have a very good unit. You have monumental contractors. This one's an interesting one because monumental contractors basically allows you to participate in building wonders that the other player is building. And depending on how much you contribute to that, you can get a choice to generate money, influence, or leverage. So that is, it can be an interesting one, especially if you want to generate leverage to continue doing various leverage actions. You have diplomatic cooperation, which is one I've used a lot recently because I find it very difficult to actually pick up and generate leverage. Diplomatic cooperation gives you half of the leverage that the other empire collects when it's sitting on the map. So if they were to walk over a leverage, which I don't believe there is one on the map, say they got 10 leverage, you would get 5. And it applies vice versa as well. The AI tend to be a lot better at it than the players are because they know where all the leverage is. But yeah, this one's pretty useful. You have humanitarian aid, which can also be good. So this is pretty straightforward. You get some extra food and money on your capital, same with the other player. And then the cultural entente, this one basically removes the oppressing my people grievances. So that particular grievance is when you have cultural influence over another player's territory. So say this is green, right? Or this turns green, I will get that grievance against them. That particular leverage action removes the ability to get that grievance. And instead, territories under the cultural control of the other player will get some extra stuff. This one is actually not very good if you are in the lead, right? If you're really struggling with another player's culture, that's when you want this, but then the other player doesn't have any incentive to accept, right? So this one's a bit of an odd agreement, and I actually can't say I've ever used that one. All right. I think we've explored everything we need to explore this turn, so let's go ahead and end the turn. There's hydrology, and we can also claim a wonder. So I'm going to show you the impact of hydrology. I'm actually going to buy out that satrap's palace just because I want that complete and starting to generate money and influence. And then we can look at the watermill and the artificial reservoirs, right? So artificial reservoirs, plus 28 food, huge boost to food. Watermill, plus 50 industry, right? Because like, look at how many rivers I have. And the emblematic district that the Mycenaeans built before I conquered it, the Cyclopean fortress, is exploiting the industry on all the tiles around it. And the Cyclopean fortress doesn't need to be built adjacent to the existing city, so it's really, really efficient at getting the highest value tiles. So Watermill is going to be next on the agenda here because of how effective that is in producing industry, right? That is a 20% increase, basically, in the industry that I have in that city. It's not going to be quite so dramatic in Memphis, but still, plus 34 industry is really, really strong, and plus 28 food is also really, really strong. So I am queuing the industry before I queue the other things, because by building the industry first, it makes everything that follows it more efficient to build, right? So I just want to wrap up that Satrap's Palace since it's almost done, and then I'm going to go into the watermill. And then finally, down in Thebes, this is not going to be as effective, right? Because I'm not exploiting as much of the terrain as I am in other locations. So I'm actually not going to queue those up to be built right away, and I'm going to wait for some of these other things to be built. I am just going to queue up the iron mine, just because it's good to have your resources online. I'm going to pull some of these units back and let that guy heal. Then I'm going to heal the swordsman and that archer. And then I'm just going to attack this independent people. So independent people basically spawn kind of randomly on the map in unclaimed territories. They can be a help or a hindrance. Right now they are a hindrance. We don't want them occupying this territory. That is territory that I intend to attach to another city later. So I'm just going to go ahead and take them out. Now, I could try to win this battle by stepping onto the flag and just defending. So if you take the opposing flag and you have that at the end of the battle round, you win the battle. However, I want to farm the militarist stars. So by not ending the battle, I actually have the opportunity to kill additional units, right? Because that flag that you saw there meant that they had reinforcements that could enter the battle, which they did, right? So now I have multiple units that I can kill. And again, I don't want to step onto that flag. That unit is not going to die from attacking me. So now by conserving it for an extra turn, I'm going to get an extra point towards this militarist Aerosar. We also have a new civic available. So this one is pretty good. Religious tolerance, you have open-minded versus religious hostility. So open-minded. You can get extra stability for non-state religion followers on all your cities. So you can see here, all mine are my own. So if this were, say, orange, I would get extra stability for every population that follows the orange religion. However, it also gives the effect that you get +1 influence per state religion follower in your territories. So for every one of your own religious followers, you are generating an extra point of influence. You also have religious hostility. So religious hostility gives that kind of the opposite effect in terms of stability. You get negative stability for non-state religion followers, but you get extra faith on territories, and you get an extra grievance against empires that have a different state religion. So religious hostility is really nice for a very expansionist, military-minded sort of play. The extra faith on territories is also pretty good at spreading your religion, which gets you up to the next tier of tenant faster. So open-minded, generally better for peaceful, and if you're not doing as well on religion, or it's like been taken over kind of by someone else, religious hostility is generally what I go for, though. And that will also move me on the homeland axis to get me that +1 combat strength on units. So I'm going to get religious hostility. And you'll see I am now going to have a grievance against literally everyone else in the game. I'm going to forgive it against several people, including the Carthaginians, since I am peaceful with them. I'm going to forgive it against the Huns here, since they're too far away. I'm going to forgive it against the Romans, since they're also really far away, and probably the Harappans as well. I'm just not looking to go to war with them anytime in the near future. This player I've basically knocked out, but they're not technically dead yet. They probably have a unit running around. I can still renounce that in order to get some leverage. However, I am going to make a demand of the Babylonians, and they instantly rejected it. So you'll see I have no active demands at the moment, which is fine. I'm not really ready to go to war. I was just hoping to build some war support. It's not going to work out this time, but that's okay. Next time, or not next time, this next tech, I'm going to go into philosophy. This gets me city cap, and most importantly, it gets me that research quarter, as well as the school. But the research quarter is pretty critical to making sure that you don't fall behind on technology. I also have a wonder available. I actually don't have enough right now. I just thought I did, but I spent some influence on a civic, so I have to wait a few more turns before I can claim a wonder. We'll end our turn. And we're just going to shoot the citizens. And that'll take that city. We don't want this city. It's not a good city. We are just going to pillage it. It only takes one turn. However, let's talk about other independent people really quickly. So there's a few different ways to interact with them. So one is, just attacking them. And the other is more peaceful. So you can see here, this has a little peace sign on it. That means they won't attack you unless you actively engage them. They'll just leave you alone. So you can see a whole bunch of information here on the patronage screen. So basically, you can kind of become like suzerain of these independents, much like in Civilization 6 or 7. One important thing to note is the lifespan of an independent people here. It's the third indicator. This is how many turns an independent people has left before they go into, or before they disappear off the map. Once they're at 10 turns or fewer, the independent people is in decline, and you can no longer get any more treaties with them. There's nothing you can really do to save them at that point. So the first step is establishing contact. You can pay influence, and this allows you to basically bribe them using influence or using gold to kind of move along your friendliness track, I guess you could call it. And every time you get to a certain threshold, you have an option of one of these things. So say I got to this second tier of relationship, I can get a trading charter, a mercenary charter, or science collaboration. Next year, I can get profit sharing, privilege contract, or cultural exports. And then finally, only one person can have one of these options. You can get a client state, or you can assimilate. So assimilate basically brings them into your own empire. And client state is kind of like having, being a suzerain. So you get some extra yields, you get some extra international sway, which is a resource in the World Congress, and just generally makes them more aligned with you. So that's the very basics of this. Generally, if they're kind of camping out in your own empire, it's easier to just conquer them. But it is really nice to get some good relations with some that are farther away. I'm going to establish contact probably with Sus, just because this has a longer time to live right now, right? So that's 35 here, 49 here. So I'm just going to establish contact, and then you'll see this menu on the side has appeared, which basically allows you to bribe them. So if I go to none, you'll see I'm at 0 as far as patronage. If I move up to 6, I'm now getting +1 per turn, 12 +2, or 24 for +3. I usually use the middle option, and as you get to these different thresholds sort of indicated here, 20, 50, 100, you unlock these different treaties that you can have with those independents. They can be useful. Independents are not a critical part of the game for the most part, so if you don't want to manage those things, don't worry about it. Let's see. I also have another option here. So these are things that you can activate in your city. So this one allows you to sacrifice the population to increase your money, or sacrifice the population to increase stability. Neither of those are particularly important for me, and I don't want to sacrifice population. This thing, since it's just being pillaged, I'm just going to have it work on whatever random thing. It doesn't really matter. And we're also being attacked by some rebels here, so we'll just deal with this attack really quickly. These are just warriors that have been running around and rebelled previously because of low stability in one of my occupied cities in Mycenae. We should also take a look at going on expert policy here. So I think I'm going to prioritize industry, and then maybe money, and then science, because I'm probably going to convert Memphis and Thebes into more sort of science-oriented cities. So I'm going to kind of turn Mycenae into more of a gold-oriented city. Of course, it's still primarily going to be production in here, given where we're at. Okay. Few things have happened. So the Huns have proposed a non-aggression pact, and I'm actually fine with that. They're very far away right now, and I have no plans on kind of being aggressive towards them. I also have a wonder available, and there are a few. There are quite a few good wonders in the classical era as well. Pyramid of the Sun is not as good as it seems. +2 food on tile producing food actually only applies in the territory where it's built. It is not an empire-wide effect, so bear that in mind. Lighthouse of Alexandria is good for like naval gameplay. The extra naval movement speed and combat strength is really strong. Mausoleum is also like, it's like an average wonder, but it can fill a nice gap because the extra 2 science per district on the city that you build it in can really help kind of buffer your science a little bit if you've kind of fallen behind. Colosseum is another one that I would recommend if you're playing a more warlike game. It basically gives you the option to immediately gain war support at the start of a war. Also really good in a defensive war if you have started the war with kind of low war support. You also get some extra money depending on the number of ongoing wars that you have and or war weariness. What I'm going to choose, though, is Church of Our Lady, Mary of Zion. So what I want to do is try to rocket up the tenants screen. And you can see here, right, there's kind of 2 dominant religions right now. There's mine, and then there's orange. What I want to do is try to push orange out and convert people to mine. And how I do that is by having faith generation that is like close to the border. So this, wrong menu. This Church of Our Lady gives you extra faith per number of enacted civics, so this scales up over the course of the game. It also, critically, you can see under resource exploitation, it exploits everything. And one of the things that it isn't said about a lot of wonders is that you can place many wonders anywhere that you want, including the Church of Our Lady. So you can build it in a place that gets maximum resource exploitation, and I can kind of place it near my front line so that my faith is pushing out the other player's religion so that I can try to get up to the second tier of tenants before they do. So Church of Our Lady is actually not in the game by default. You have to get it on the Games Together website. It is free. You just need to have your Amplifiers account connected and can claim this. There are some instructions online if you want to look up how to get it. So this is not a wonder that is like particular to any expansion pack or anything like that. So you'll see, right, I have the option of basically putting it anywhere. I could put it very far forward if I wanted to. Like right here, might not be a bad option. I could get a lot of industry by putting it right here. 39 industry, 45 faith, 40 stability. And I'm definitely putting it in Mycenae just because I want it pretty far forward. Just thinking, you know, right here, we'll probably eventually get filled up with districts that will want to be adjacent to each other. But at the same time, both of these are actually very efficient places to put this. I think I will get a little bit more food over the industry because I am already very effective on industry here. So when you put a shared project down, it'll put that in the start of the queue. I don't want that in the start of the queue. I'm fine with waiting for a little bit while we worry about the Satrap's Palace first. Game froze for a second there. Okay, I'm just checking I'm on expert policy in here. And I'm on balanced in here. I'm going to put this on expert policy so I can define how new population is distributed. And we're going to do something like that. So it'll be industry, science, food, and then money. And then technology. We could go for rhetoric, which would get us the library. The +1 science per population is pretty strong. We're going to start with that. We're also just going to try to demonstrate under one banner here. We'll see if they actually come fight me. This will piss them off a little bit, but I actually can't do it with someone that has I have a non-aggression pact with, which I completely forgot about. So I'll have to kind of relocate up here and try to do it to the Babylonians. I should also probably consider getting another army. I'm going to move these guys back towards the front. This swordsman will come here, and they're just going to plop another outpost down here once I have the influence to do so. So Mycenae, I have the option of spawning units kind of up here, so I'm going to do that because the Mycenaeans' emblematic quarter is a garrison. And I have access to my immortal units, which are really strong units. So you can see they actually have a higher base combat strength than the swords do, right? So they're at 30, the swords have 28. They also have the anti-cavalry bonus, so they get extra combat strength when they're fighting against mounted units. And they have Bastion. So Bastion is a really good effect because you get a bonus when you're either on high ground or when you're in a fortified position. So a fortified position is within city walls, on a garrison, that sort of thing. And then high ground we've talked about before. Because you want high ground basically all the time, there's never a point where you don't want to be fighting from the high ground. It makes Immortals pretty strong because not only are you getting the high ground benefit, but you're also getting an extra benefit from Bastion on top of it. So it makes Immortals very difficult to dislodge from either a fortified or a high ground location. So we're just going to do up a whole bunch of Immortals. Honestly, you can like make your whole army Immortals if you want. They're a very good unit. Okay. 2 Immortals are done. And basically what we're doing is prepping for a proper war against the Babylonians. So why the Babylonians? So first of all, I don't think the city is very good. It's kind of in an awkward position, and it doesn't have any river, right? Like it has a little bit right here, but the city is going to struggle to grow. Whereas Babylon has a decent amount of river, but it also has a lot of luxuries, right? So it has this papyrus, it has marble, which I don't have access to yet, +2 industry per worker would be really nice. Gold, it has some porcelain, it has a whole bunch of resources of, what are they called? The strategic resources. Whereas this player I can just trade to get their resources right now, and they're not particularly a threat to me, right? They're in 3rd at the moment with only 2150 fame, whereas this player is a little bit closer to me, right? They're still technically in the ancient era, but they are a scientist culture, and scientists have the ability to research tech from the next era. So they could still have swordsmen and that sort of thing. So I kind of think of Babylon as a bigger threat right now, and I also think of their city as potentially being more valuable than this one. So that's kind of why I want to focus a little bit on Babylon. Just going to plop down that there, and we'll just influence purchase this harbor so that when this gets attached to a city later, it'll generate a little bit of extra food. Meant to go there. And I'm also going to have a little sip of my beer here. Delicious. All right. I am drinking a beer made with some kind of experimental hop, which is quite exciting. Okay. So we'll end our turn. Have our Immortals. And we're going to kind of creep up over this way and maybe try to steal that administrative center before declaring war. I still don't have any crises with them because they rejected my last one. And it's going to take a while before I get up to another tier of tenant as well. So we've got a little ways to go before we really declare war. I don't know why I threw that tenant comment in there because it's actually unrelated to when I'm going to declare war on them. So don't read too much into that. So in Memphis, again, I think that harbor is pretty low priority. I actually haven't put any production into it yet. So I think I'm going to take that out and add in the Church of Our Lady. And I should also try to add in a couple infrastructure here. So animal barns would be nice because we are running low on food. Animal barns gives you +1 food per horse, as well as some adjacency bonuses on farmers' quarters. And probably same thing here. animal barns are a little bit more effective than the artificial reservoirs. So we're going to continue moving these units. And I do have 5 speed because of one of the wonders that I've built. And I should also consider getting an envoy. I think I'm going to add it into the queue here, just so I can kind of show you a little bit more about that. Okay, we have an option here of 2 narrative choices. So there's pronounce or authorize. Basically, it's about like polluting water. You don't need to read too much into this. So you can get this bountiful and pay 1,000 gold. This gives you plus 15 food, and bad things won't happen, basically. And then you have authorize, which moves you towards individualism, gives you overproductive, the plus 17 industry for 10 turns, but there's a chance that you'll trigger some negative event later down the line, which I believe is like a negative food effect. So it's kind of a trade-off. I am typically going to go for authorize because 1,000 gold at the start of the game is quite a bit, and I don't want to lose that liberty access effect. Whereas I don't mind going from plus 5% stability down to plus 0% stability. I find the loss of plus 2 influence on emblematic districts to have a bigger impact on my game. So I'm going to take authorize, and it's fine if I get that event later. The Romans want to trade luxuries with me, and they've actually been conquered. I'm just going to refuse that, just because they are not going to matter anymore. And up here, so you can see right here, this little symbol right here, that means that they have made them a client state. So that actually, when they're made a client state, it makes their lifespan indefinite, so they will be around as long as no one conquers them. Let's see, this swordsman, what I can actually do with this sword is position them near the water, because one thing you want to start doing in the classical era, and I didn't mention this in the tech, is on trade expeditions you can get a transport galley. Transport galley allows your units to embark and disembark, so they can get on and off the water. And typically on most maps there are going to be some outlying islands. You can see a little one right here. You can see another one kind of up here. I think, yep, there's a couple over here. And oftentimes these islands will have resources on them, so you want to try to secure those as soon as possible, because those resources do give global benefits. So we're just working our way over here to try to demonstrate the under one banner effect. And as you can see, I'm making use of freely being able to trespass an opposing player's territory. And this guy is going to come down here. This is our envoy. So the envoys are units that can pick up the leverage. And leverage is dropped on a map whenever there is a grievance that's generated. So say I took over cultural control right here, which I'm going to do in 6 turns. That's going to generate a grievance here around the culture of that territory. And there's going to be a leverage that drops on the map for people to pick up. So they kind of occur at the same time. As far as tech goes, I am going to go into trade expeditions and then craftsmanship. And then I'll have like all my core classical era techs researched. So trade expeditions will allow this guy to get out into the water there. And then on Thebes, let's take a look at all of our options. I think what we'll do is have it help finish the wonder. And then we can get a pretty, 27 industry versus 14 industry and 10 influence. Excuse me. So this is something that the game will like to do. It really likes when you generate influence. But if you're building a maker's quarter, you're really building it for industry, right? So this is clearly a much better tile for industry, plus 27 there. This is not a bad tile by any means, but I value this industry more than that influence right now. And I would like to get up to around 400 industry in this era. And probably the same thing here, where I fill out a little bit more industry so that I'm really productive in terms of building things. And then finally, over in Mycenae, they're still working on their satrap's palace. I can get the Church of Our Lady down to 2 turns by moving that in there, so I think I'm going to do that. I also noticed that I'm starting to lose a little bit of stability in my capital. So what I'm actually going to do is use this obelisk right here to kind of fill in a little bit of that gap, right? So if I put it right here, then I could get some decent adjacency. So the obelisk gets faith adjacency for adjacent quarters. So if I put it right here, it would also provide a little bit of extra adjacency to that satrap's palace, and then we can fill in around it later. And it'll give me a base of 20 stability, so we can get a decent amount in there. So we'd be at 100 again. So managing stability is going to progressively get harder this game. At least until we get some better options to deal with it. So we're going to move this guy onto that administrative center there, right? You can hover over the tile in order to see what type it is. So right here, that's an exploitation. This is an artisan's quarter. So administrative centers are usually pretty distinctive. And I am going to trigger this under 1 banner. And I click on it, and you'll see 5 out of 5. They just can't be interrupted, and if I get down to 0, then this territory will be absorbed into my empire. The Huns are also proposing humanitarian aid, so both of us would get extra food and money on capital. I'm going to accept, simply because my capital is typically going to be better than their capital, so the net benefit for me is generally larger. Okay, so because there's no, no leverage to collect, what I can do is have this envoy camp out on top of a foreign city. And you'll see when I hover over influence, I have plus 11 influence from cultural bridges. That is from these envoys basically sitting in foreign cities. So you can just park them in cities and generate a little bit of extra influence if there's nothing to pick up on the map. So we've completed our wonder and we've researched trade expeditions. I'm going to get this unit onto the ocean. So I want them in this kind of lighter blue water. That is where they won't take any damage. If you have them out on the dark blue water, that is open ocean, and they will take damage from being there, depending on kind of where you are in tech. So your first turn, you're not going to take anything. Next turn, this guy will be lost at sea, and if I don't get them back to shallow water on that turn, then they will die. The lost at sea effect will vary a little bit depending on what area you're in and what units you're talking about. Okay, so they're trying to come stop me from getting this under 1 banner off. I am basically just going to try to block them. And I don't think they really have any way to get down there other than through these tiles. So they're going to have to attack me, or they just have to accept that I'm taking that territory. Okay, and you can see this is the impact from the choice that I took. So I'm going to lose some food on Thebes, which is really not that big of a deal. I lose a population in 61 turns. It's completely manageable. So let's end our turn here. You can see this lost at sea. I have 1 turn to get them safe again, and we're good. I am also going to start specializing Memphis. So I had talked about specializing Memphis as kind of a research city, and I get some adjacency for being next to the strategic resources, right? And I have a few. I have horse right here and copper right here. So I'm going to start building right here where I get probably the most amount of science that I can get, while also being adjacent to the satrap's palace, which will get me a little bit of extra influence. So I'm going to kind of fill in this area, and then as the game goes on, I'll start getting some extra adjacencies from these different, what are they called, infrastructure down here. That will increase the amount of science that I'm getting because the science quarters are stacked near each other. Excuse me. I'm also going to add the library in because this is pretty production efficient. Library gives +1 science per population, so this is a good one to have in pretty much all of your cities. Okay, and these units can just idle, which is just this little circle button down there. So we've unlocked several stars, and we finished craftsmanship. What I'm going to do with this guy is just pop them up here. Doesn't really matter where I settle this. So you can see I have the ebony as well as the ambergris here. So once this settlement is up and running, I can influence purchase both of these resources, and that's going to globally benefit my empire. So that's why you want to try to secure as many of those islands as you can once you have some technology to do so. So as far as this city is concerned, I could get another Maker's Quarter, right? However, I'm thinking about getting the charcoal kiln because this only costs 191, or sorry, it's 480 production versus 906 production. So it's quite a bit cheaper to build this one. I think strictly speaking, the Maker's Quarter is more production efficient. So what do I mean by production efficient? It means that you get the most output out of that quarter per industry cost that you put into it. So basically, if you take the total cost of the quarter, which in this case is 906, and I say put it here, and divide that by 21, that is your like production efficiency, right? So, excuse me. I guess you invert it, right? So 21 divided by 906. So that's how many yields you're getting for every point of production that you put into that district. So when you're deciding what to select, right, you generally want to build the most production efficient thing first. The charcoal kiln is actually kind of underrepresenting maybe how valuable it is. No. So the reason I say that, so say I built it in Memphis here. This also gets plus 11 industry, but it also gives plus 2 access to copper. And copper, because of the forge, you get plus 1 industry per copper that you have. So if I build the charcoal kiln in a city with copper, that gives me an extra plus 2 accesses to copper, which in turn gives me plus 2 production. So if I build this in Memphis, it actually gets me plus 13 production rather than plus 11. That's not a super big difference, but sometimes like these little tiny optimizations can help improve your game, right? Okay, I've queued up everything I want in Memphis. It's just thieves I need to decide. Let's just get the charcoal kiln so I have it, and that way I don't increase the district cost of future districts. So one thing that can be challenging for newcomers to Humankind is every district that you build increases the cost of subsequent districts. So this 906 is currently a different cost than this one, right? This is 806. And that's based on kind of the number of quarters that you have in the city and applicable discounts. So as your city gets larger, you need more industry to keep increasing the size. So by kind of limiting the number of districts that you have, it allows you to build other districts more easily. So I'm going to get the charcoal kiln, and then I'm probably going to get a garrison because I need some stability. And the garrisons I generally put in out-of-the-way locations that I don't intend to really build on. So I could put it like out here, and maybe another one adjacent to it. And then that way, that'll get me plus 10 stability, and then I can build the City Watch, which gives plus 5 stability on garrisons, so that will be a net of plus 20 stability. So that'll help keep my stability up, because I need to start worrying about it a little bit, because I'm dropping a little bit low. Okay, so we have technology still, and like I've mentioned before, we've completed like all the core techs for the era already. So at this point, we're setting up for future techs. So really the important techs at the start of the next era is feudalism and war summons. So feudalism gives you extra food on tile producing food, which is really strong. And war summons gives you access to your core military units and your pikemen and your crossbow. Theology is also good because of the city cap and manuscript atelier. But really feudalism and war summons are going to be some of your first techs every time you enter medieval. So for that reason, I like to go for Imperial Power, because this unlocks access to both of these, right? Whereas Foreign Outposts and Siege Tactics are quite a bit more niche in terms of where you go with them. So Imperial Power is pretty much always my first tech choice after getting my the rest of my core techs research for the Classical era. So we can end the turn here. And we're going to keep exploring a little bit with this guy and see if we can find any more island chains. It seems pretty unlikely. I can't see anything right now, but you never know. And then we can also claim another wonder if we want. So, for instance, we could get the Colosseum, which would be not bad for us, but I think we're going to conserve our influence just because we don't really need to spam wonders. And every wonder that you claim increases the cost of claiming your next wonder. So that scales up over time and makes it more difficult to claim the more important wonders that you might want later. So we have taken this territory, as you can see. We got our Under One banner off, so it is now converted to an outpost, as well as all the things that were in it. So we now have this coffee, as well as this natural wonder here. Natural wonders provide some extra effects for the territory that they're in. So Lake Natron provides some stability, science, and food on farmers for a city or outpost that is connected to this. By connected, so say I were to absorb, right, my production on the farmers here would go from 9 to, I believe, 11. So nice to have natural wonders. Oftentimes they're not in very good locations, but worth considering when you're attaching. So now that we've taken this, I'm going to move this guy, and then we're going to attack this army that's hanging out here. They're going to retreat. That's going to give us a little bit of war support, but they're also going to get a grievance right here. We're just going to refuse their demands. Refusing demands increases their war supports. However, they don't get ticking war supports anymore, right? Because they have no grievances against us. This person also wants to sign scientific correspondence. Based on the number of stars that they have and the fact they're in the classical era, it's very likely I'm ahead of them on science and have no real reason to want to sign this. So I'm going to refuse. We also have the option to enter the next era. I'm going to remind me later, because if we take a look at our era stars, we have quite a few to go, right? And we still have quite a bit of tech to go as well. And speaking of tech, let me take a look here. Yeah, we have a decent number of turns left to research things. So I'm not going to worry about our current distribution. But what you can do is if you feel like you're going to research these things too fast and you're going to outpace your era star progression, you can start moving scientists onto other outputs. So say I could move these guys onto money, and that'll slow down your progression so that you have time to catch up with your other era stars. We'll end the turn here, and I think probably the episode. Just because next time we can talk a little bit more about some combat tactics in the classical era as we move on to fight the brown player here, and then probably eventually go after the former Harappans, who are now the Celts. The Celts are actually a pretty challenging opponent, so that should be an interesting one. So hope you all found this helpful. I know this is like getting both a little bit more in the weeds while simultaneously being more high level. Compared to some of the previous episodes. The thing to be clear about is that really a lot of the basics stay the same across eras in terms of how you develop your cities, how you play combat, those sorts of items, how you engage with the other players, why you decide to go to war or not. But generally, you should always be looking to expand and keeping on top of your city development and like really being mindful of how you place down your districts in order to try to maximize those outputs. So appreciate you all tuning in. Next time we'll wrap up the classical era and we'll see if we need to continue this one after that. Because after the end of the classical era, a lot of the game is pretty much decided already. So I'll let you all be the judge of whether you would like to continue this past the classical era or not. So let me know in the comments, and otherwise I'll see you soon. Cheers.